Ladies and gentlemen, in this video, I will be going through part 2 of my 9/11 Iceberg rehashing events in regards to September 11th, beginning with more well-known topics, slowly working down to niche, unheard-of facts. Box cutters is in reference to the 9/11 hijackers and their usage of them during the attack. Box cutters were legally brought on board as part of the hijackers' carry-on luggage, as pre-9/11 laws on what you could travel with were very lax at the time. Security was more focused on bombs, not knives, and even if knives came out during a hijacking, the prevailing consensus was a hostage-type situation, with the plane presumably landing safely. The added ingredient of 9/11 was using the planes themselves as weapons. The box cutters were used quite simply to gain control of the plane and enter the cockpit, which at the time was a lot easier. After 9/11, an emergency law was put in banning all small knives, and cockpit doors were reinforced, making it virtually impossible to enter without the pilots themselves unlocking them. The Patriot Act describes a government maneuver in response to 9/11 passed a month and a half after the terror event. The act allowed the FBI significant surveillance power, specifically allowing them to secretly obtain data collection via citizens' cell phones. This act expanded the definition of terrorism, using it more broadly, allowing for more cases to fall within its purview. It has since been widely criticized for privacy violations of American citizens, with many arguing the act allowed the FBI too much broad authority beyond terrorism. It's what the NSA used to justify widespread metadata collection from phones, which was later ruled illegal. The Patriot Act is a perfect example of the government using a tragedy to broaden authority in a way that originally isn't understood by the general public. Ground Zero refers to the massive debris field in lower Manhattan in and around the World Trade Center complex. That debris field included every single building that was a part of the complex. Buildings 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 were all destroyed or partially destroyed and then completely demoed. The site took around 9 months to clear, with 1.8 million tons of debris removed. Ground Zero included the survivor staircase, which was a staircase previously located inside of the lobby within the North Tower that remained intact, largely due to its solid, reinforced concrete build. Today it's a part of the 9/11 Memorial Museum. Ground Zero was actually very deep. As the original Twin Towers were designed, it was practically an excavation site going 70 feet down. First responders would discuss the problems with verticality in regards to the sheer amount of debris that was piled on top of itself. Some of the steel from the site was recycled, with other areas that were semi-together, like the tridents at the base, on display at various locations throughout the United States. Bush Classroom is in regards to the U.S. President George W. Bush learning about 9/11 from inside of a Sarasota, Florida elementary school classroom. It was White House Chief of Staff Andrew Card who whispered into Bush's ear. He said, quote, "A second plane has hit the World Trade Center. America is under attack." This was said just minutes after the South Tower was impacted. Bush continued reading to the school children for about 8 minutes to not cause a panic, and then excused himself. Collapse on live TV is in reference to the amount of footage we have documenting both of the towers collapsing. Seconds after the North Tower got hit, cameras and helicopters began circling the Twin Towers. There was actually very little personal video documenting the tower's fall, as in 2001 personal cameras that people carried were not common. This was well before smartphones. The South Tower collapse was much easier to document, as when it fell, there was no crazy smoke cloud. Obviously, when it did collapse, it created the smoke cloud, which obstructed the view of the North Tower collapsing. Because of the thick smoke, many cameras became virtually unusable and rendered useless. It is estimated around 500 unique recordings exist in and around the World Trade Center complex, but only a very small percentage of them show the towers actually collapsing themselves, as most of them are filmed from the street, only showing people evacuating with dust obstructing views. Middle East Wars is in reference to the subsequent wars that happened as a result of September 11th. The Afghanistan War was a direct effect of 9/11, spanning 20 years. The Iraq War, happening 2 years later, was partially caused by 9/11. It was used as justification because of potential WMDs getting in the hands of terrorists. The Pakistan drone war was also caused in part by 9/11, as many members of Al-Qaeda fled to Pakistan, with the United States drone striking different tribal plots of the country. Pentagon CCTV footage is the only video we have of the Pentagon being impacted by an airplane on 9/11. The Pentagon itself was not the best target if you're going for max casualties, as the building was more so wide than it was tall. Nonetheless, it was picked not at random, but because it was recognized as a major U.S. governmental building showing American strength. There are slowed upscale versions of the CCTV video that do show what looks like the outline of a plane hitting the Pentagon. Some have speculated, based on the poor video quality and only one angle, it could have potentially been a missile. When it comes to CCTV surrounding the Pentagon, the U.S. government is mainly worried about air threats high above them. To be fair, considering it is the Pentagon, it does feel a bit strange that the only surveillance patrolling a side of the building was a grainy CCTV camera, although that was also a checkpoint of entrance, so if anyone wanted to enter the building, they would have had to have gotten through that checkpoint. Sagging truss is in reference to the main trigger mechanism of the collapse within each tower. The Twin Towers relied heavily on outer wall supports because of its open floor plan. When the floors on the interior superheated, they began to sag, which put pressure on the outer walls, pulling them inward. This can be best depicted and seen in video footage of the South Tower collapsing, as it looks like the outer walls began to invert inward seconds before collapse. If the Twin Towers had been built like the Empire State Building, where weight was more evenly distributed throughout the interior walls of the tower, they would have fared a better chance of remaining up. Thermite refers to the claim that the Twin Towers were brought down by planted thermite charges. Thermite itself is not an explosive. It burns at an extremely high temperature, which can effectively cut steel. For thermite to be ignited and for it to actually work, someone would have had significant access to the steel structure within the Twin Towers in the months leading up to the event. One of the main reasons this theory exists is because of nanothermite dust particles that were said to have been found in a 2009 study within the debris of the towers. The NIST said that they were paint flakes from perimeter columns, which looked similar but are not thermite. A main issue with the theory of thermite is the fact that it is not normally used during controlled demolitions. Thermite would require perfect sequencing and ignition, along with the fact that it burns extremely slowly. 3WTC Corner refers to the Marriott Hotel, which was building number 3, specifically the northwest corner. 3 to 4 stories of the hotel was still standing, basically as a result of luck, after the North and South Tower collapsed. It was virtually crushed, with 99% of the building toppled. The interior of those stories that remained upright, of course, was completely destroyed. Nonetheless, it is crazy the fact that 2 110-story skyscrapers could collapse within the area of a much smaller hotel, and that corner still survive. Bush Saudi refers to the connections George W. Bush had with Saudi Arabia. The Bush family's connections began via the oil industry. Osama bin Laden's half-brother invested into 2 of W. Bush's companies via the Carlyle Group, a large private equity group that invested into defense. Although W. Bush never met the half-brother of Osama bin Laden, on the day of September 11th, the Carlyle Group held a meeting with the father, H.W. Bush, and bin Laden's half-brother. After 9/11, the Carlyle Group stopped doing business with bin Laden to remove suspicion. There were also private charter flights that have been said to have transported Saudi nationals, including bin Laden family members, out of the United States in the days following September 11th. Global jihad refers to the idea that violence is acceptable if it advances political aims, specifically within Islam. The belief was a linchpin for the spread of Islamic terrorism in the West, culminating with the September 11th attacks. This version of jihadism was heavily influenced by Osama bin Laden, specifically after the United States ascended upon Saudi Arabia to protect it against Saddam Hussein after his invasion of Kuwait. This was predated by the Soviet-Afghan War in the 1980s, which originally mainstreamed the belief. Global jihad basically globalized Islamic terrorism against Western countries, specifically the United States, for meddling in the Middle East. Sold to China refers to the high amount of steel that was sold directly to the Chinese in the months and years following September 11th. China offered relatively high prices for the steel that came out of the debris from the Twin Towers, as they were already importing large amounts of scrap steel. Around 25% of the steel from the complex was sold and recycled by the Chinese. A decent portion also went off to India. The steel was eventually melted and used in standard construction. The steel was originally inspected following the collapse. One of the reasons the sale was so controversial was due to the conspiracy surrounding the steel melting. Of course, jet fuel cannot melt steel, literally, although it can weaken it, exuding more pressure onto other supports within the building. Afghan training is in reference to the initial training that was given to the 9/11 hijackers. This training took place in 1999 and 2000 in Afghanistan training camps within Taliban-controlled territory. 3 key pilot hijackers received higher-level training. Much of the muscle hijackers received a basic militant boot camp. They were also taught how to use fake identities and how to use payphones, as they had plans to travel and stay in the United States for several months before the attacks. The 4 pilot hijackers also did basic flight training in Afghanistan. Of course, we all know the majority of their training with actual planes happened within the United States. Freefall speed refers to the speed at which the Twin Towers collapsed, often cited as evidence of some type of controlled demolition. However, neither the North or South Tower fell at what would be considered freefall speed. The calculated freefall speed of a building like the North Tower would be around 9.2 seconds. Both the North and South collapsed in around 13.5 to 14 seconds, which is around 50% longer than what would be considered freefall speed. It should be noted, in the first few seconds of the North Tower's collapse, it was virtual freefall speed. The overall slower collapse meant the towers did have resistance as they were falling. The resistance would have been within each floor being pancaked on top of one another. PNAC is an abbreviation for Project for a New American Century, founded by a neoconservative think tank in 1997, 4 years before 9/11. The think tank believed in preemptive wars against rogue states, including a willingness to act unilaterally if needed with increased defense spending. This was an aggressive agenda. The group included prominent neocon Dick Cheney, who would become Vice President of the United States under George W. Bush, presiding as VP during the attacks. Cheney was extremely hands-on as Vice President. A key document within the PNAC was a 2000 review titled Rebuilding America's Defenses, detailing the need for a catastrophic event like Pearl Harbor to rally support around heavy defense spending. Fifth plane refers to the theory that the hijackers originally planned for another target using a fifth hijacked plane. The theory was made popular by a recent TMZ YouTube video. There were at least 3 flights where flight attendants reported men that strongly resembled the hijackers. A suspected, possible, eventual hijacked plane was United Airlines Flight 23. This flight was still at the gate when all flights got grounded due to an emergency order. It was reported on the tarmac that a group of Middle Eastern men were acting strangely and becoming angered by the flight's delay, and one man demanded his luggage back immediately after the shutdown of the flights was announced. The 4-man suspected hijacking crew was not seen from again. It is also said that there were more than 4 trained pilot hijackers, as estimates say anywhere from 6 to 10 potential hijackers were trained. The 9/11 Commission did admit that Al-Qaeda originally planned for more hijackings, but said there was no 5th plane on 9/11 due to possible visa problems and the arrest of one of the potential pilot hijackers before 9/11 could have happened. Shanksville bomb is about the crash site of Flight 93 in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. The crash site itself is unique in the fact that the immediate radius had very little debris, and from an aerial vantage point, the crash scene resembled a crater. It was described as a gouged-out trench in the ground. It's estimated that Flight 93 hit the ground at around 550 miles per hour at an around 45-degree angle. Because of the immense speed, much of the plane fragmented or was buried upon impact. Another reason it resembled a crater was because of the sheer energy from the crash, resembling almost a small bomb. For an object as big as an airplane to hit the ground at a 45-degree angle traveling 550 miles per hour, the energy transfer is going to be severe. The plane itself, for lack of a better term, will disintegrate. The composite of the soil in which the plane crashed upon also impacted the lack of recoverable items, as it absorbed much of the crash itself. John O'Neill was an FBI counterterrorism expert that died working as a security officer, perishing during the collapse of the North Tower on September 11th. His story is one of the crazier you will see in relation to 9/11. O'Neill originally heavily warned in the mid-1990s about a possible bin Laden al-Qaeda-style terror event, especially after the 1993 failed bombing of the Twin Towers. He even alluded to the fact that the World Trade Center would be a top target once again, thinking they would try and finish the job after the initial one failed in 1993. By August of 2001, just a month before September 11th, O'Neill had been forced out of the FBI after arguments over lack of action against Middle Eastern terrorism and other personal disputes. In late August of 2001, he took a job as head of security at the World Trade Center. He died trying to rescue people in the North Tower. 29 minutes is in reference to the time window in between the collapse of the South and North Tower. There are a few videos and photos shot in what can be described as no man's land at the base of the North Tower after the South Tower fell. At this point, around 2 to 3 feet of debris had piled up at its base as the result of the South Tower collapsing. The Marriott Hotel also had a giant hole gouged into the middle of it from debris of the South Tower. Before the North Tower's collapse, there were several rooms within the Marriott that were practically untouched even after the South Tower fell. Heavy smoke had filled the lobby of the North Tower as the building was somewhat damaged with broken windows from falling debris of the South. Bill Bigart was the only photographer to die on 9/11. He captured the final photo of the North Tower standing after the South Tower had collapsed just 1 minute before the collapse of the North. 2WTC Foundation refers to the potential modern iteration of Building Number 2. 2 World Trade Center famously has not been completed, although the foundation was initially dug, the construction commencing in the late 2000s. The original design coming from the architecture group Foster and Partners. The building's construction ran into heavy financial problems with the 2008 financial crisis, along with the fact that 2 World Trade Center didn't have any committed tenants. Ever since construction was delayed well over a decade ago, it has never resumed, and the foundation sits incomplete. There have been rumors that 2 World Trade Center will be restarted at some point within the coming years without an anchor tenant, possibly building a downscaled version of a skyscraper using the building as a dual purpose, as is how most skyscrapers are built now, with flexibility for residential space and office space. As the years have passed, it has become harder and harder to find tenants for skyscrapers in general, and with COVID happening in 2020, the completion of 2 World Trade Center suffered another setback. There is not a concrete final design for 2 World Trade Center in terms of renderings, although because the foundation has already been built, it bottlenecks the overall structure design into fitting that specific foundation. Plaza Ren is in reference to a potential World Trade Center plaza renovation that potentially would have happened in 2002 or 2003 had 9/11 not happened. There were a few different rough sketches of what a major renovation could look like within the plaza, with ideas being thrown out, possibly adding some type of see-through ceiling shielding pedestrians from precipitation. Those plans likely never would have happened, although it was said that Larry Silverstein, after purchasing the World Trade Center complex, wanted more greenery and a more vibrant plaza. They also had a big issue with the underground shopping mall in terms of it allowing no natural light. The plan was to add some type of glass pavilion, allowing the mall better lighting during the renovation. Squib is in reference to the idea of bystanders seeing small puffs of dust coming out of the lower floors of the Twin Towers during the collapse, basically insinuating those small bursts of dust were explosions triggering the collapse itself. It has been said that the puffs were really air trying to escape the building as the upper floors were collapsing on top of each other. This type of effect was significantly more enhanced because of the open floor design of the Twin Towers. Air compression became immense as the building's floors pancaked on top of one another. The biggest reason the theory falls flat is due to the fact that the squibs must detonate first. In essence, you would see those little puffs, and then you would see the building subsequently come down seconds after. That type of effect where you see the puffs during a controlled demolition doesn't happen during or after the collapse has already started. It's what's supposed to trigger the collapse itself. The fact that it happens after would allude to compressed air trying to escape the building versus those being actual charges triggering the collapse. Bin Laden deny refers to the fact that Osama bin Laden originally denied involvement in bringing down the Twin Towers. In the days following September 11th, bin Laden told Pakistani media that he had no knowledge of the attacks, calling them the work of someone else who must love freedom. This was a common strategy that bin Laden used for several other attacks. The idea was to immediately deny right after the attacks when emotions were extremely high, and then eventually take credit for them in the months and years to follow. Bin Laden also knew the United States would immediately ascend upon Afghanistan if he admitted to the attacks. Immediately denying them would give him at least a little bit of a political shield, buying him more time to release propaganda. In a 2004 video, bin Laden ended up admitting to the attacks, claiming responsibility, although there is some debate on whether or not the person speaking in the video in which he claims to have committed the attacks was actually bin Laden himself. Atta Gay refers to the rumors that Mohamed Atta, the lead pilot hijacker, may have been gay. It mainly stems from his time in Florida leading up to the attacks, with rumors from news articles that he would attend gay bars. It is true, according to the FBI, that he did frequent bars. Although the gay claims lack sufficient evidence, it's more described as hearsay. Atta and several other hijackers did do things that were not consistent with the Islamic religion, although it could have been for reason of trying to blend into an American crowd. Either way, the gay rumors are not supported by much substantial factual evidence, but permeated because of eyewitnesses living in Florida who may or may not have saw somebody that resembled Atta at a gay bar. William Cooper was a U.S. naval officer and a broadcaster. In the 1990s, Cooper predicted the United States would use a terrorist attack as a pretext for war. This would also enable the government to expand control. He specifically warned of the potential for some type of terror attack domestically, theorizing it could lead to a Middle Eastern conflict. Cooper was killed in November of 2001, months after 9/11, in a shootout with police after deputies in Arizona attempted to arrest him on assault charges. The prediction was relatively true in terms of the result of the government expanding control significantly after 9/11, and that it was used as a pretext for multiple Middle Eastern wars. Molten steel is in reference to the idea that steel had melted and been seen by workers on Ground Zero in the days following the attacks. It is said that they saw pools of metal that appeared to be liquid and molten streams pouring out from collapsed floors. This is important because the presence of molten steel would indicate thermite, insinuating a controlled collapse. The NIST maintained that there was no evidence of steel physically melting, just weakening, and the explanation for the supposed molten steel was said to be aluminum from airplanes and office furnishings burning at an extreme temperature. not necessarily as hot as 2,500 degrees, which is what it would have taken for steel to melt. Qatar help is in reference to the mastermind of 9/11, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, escaping from Qatar after being tipped off in 1996. This was following the failure of the Bojangles plot. The United States was on the hunt for Mohammed and informed the Qatari government in February of 1996 their plans to grab KSM in relation to his involvement in the Bojangles plot. However, somebody within the Qatari government tipped off Mohammed and he escaped to Pakistan. This angered the Clinton administration greatly, as KSM that same year would pitch the planes operation to Osama bin Laden, which would turn out to be 9/11. Jesus Sky refers to alleged synchronicities that appeared in the sky around 9/11 with shapes and clouds resembling Jesus, a cross, and other divine figures. The idea is that the attacks had spiritual significance and the objects in the sky were signs. Examples include a cloud forming a crucifix and a reported face of Jesus created from the smoke of the Twin Towers. There was also smoke that resembled a demon face billowing out of the towers, although there is debate on if the pictures in regards to that have been edited and exaggerated the actual smoke pattern. The synchronicity points to the idea that the universe warns people of events through symbols. De-aged bin Laden refers to the FBI using Photoshop throughout the early 2000s to update bin Laden's potential appearance through age processing. Although the technology was very poor at the time, people took this as the FBI potentially covering up the fact that they didn't actually know who bin Laden was based on images. It also adds to speculation that after bin Laden's death, famously no photos were released in relation to it. It caused people to question how much the FBI and the CIA had on bin Laden, considering they were using badly faked, aged photos for the public. Gelatin art students is in reference to an Austrian art collective. This group frequented inside of the North Tower in the year 2000, specifically on the 91st floor. The use of the North Tower was done as a part of an art project. The Bee Thing became their most famous project, as they made a temporary balcony outside the 91st floor, taking out a window, posing for photos. These art students became the center for many conspiracies, considering their usage of the North Tower relative to the short amount of time in which the building was hit. They were also on a floor that was impacted by the airplane on 9/11. These art students are separate from the Israeli art students that visited U.S. government buildings. Alien warnings refers to the idea that extraterrestrial creatures warned of a terror event, specifically September 11th, before it happened. Some alleged alien abductees claim they had precognition regarding seeing burning buildings, alluding to 9/11 happening with aliens telling them of the event during the abduction, forewarning them. This is pretty standard run-of-the-mill alien conspiracy slop, and there isn't much of any evidence that can prove this, as witnesses themselves will tell you there's no way to prove it physically, as it's mainly based off of visions.